On December 5, 1945, 5 American torpedo bombers vanished into thin air. No debris. No oil slicks. No bodies. When a massive rescue plane was sent out to find them, it vanished too. For decades, you've been told that these men were swallowed by a patch of ocean possessed by an ancient evil, rogue waves, or alien portals. You've been told that hundreds of ships and planes met the same impossible fate inside a geometric curse called the Bermuda Triangle. It is one of the greatest, most enduring mysteries of the modern world. Except, it isn't. Every single thing you just heard is a masterclass in manipulation. The truth isn't that planes and ships disappear in the Bermuda Triangle. The truth is that the Bermuda Triangle itself does not exist. We didn't solve a mystery. We fell for a ghost story manufactured by a handful of writers who realized that a thrilling lie sells significantly better than a boring reality. Part 1. The Genesis of a Ghost. To understand how an entire planet became convinced that a patch of the Atlantic Ocean was actively consuming human life, we have to look at how a myth is constructed from scratch. It requires a specific recipe, a tragedy, a deadline, and a complete lack of journalistic integrity. The tragedy occurred in late 1945 with Flight 19. 5 TBM Avenger bombers took off from Fort Lauderdale, Florida, on a routine training mission. The flight leader, Lieutenant Charles Taylor, was an experienced pilot, but he was new to the Florida Keys and had a history of getting lost. On this day, his compasses failed. Believing he was over the Gulf of Mexico, he ordered his flight to fly east, deeper into the Atlantic. By the time they realized the mistake, the fuel tanks were dry. They ditched in pitch-black darkness into a raging, stormy sea. It was a tragic, straightforward military accident. But a tragic accident doesn't write headlines. The myth lay dormant for several years, standard military history, until a writer named Edward Van Winkle Jones wrote a short piece for the Associated Press in 1950. He noted a mysterious lose of ships and planes between the Florida coast and Bermuda. 2 years later, Fate magazine published an article by George X Sand, who first drew a literal triangle on a map, connecting Florida, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico. The spark was lit, but the explosion didn't happen until 1964. An author named Vincent Gaddis wrote a cover story for a pulp magazine called Argosy. The title of the article was The Deadly Bermuda Triangle. Gaddis was a fiction writer who dabbled in the paranormal, and he understood a fundamental rule of storytelling: if the facts don't fit the narrative, change the facts. Gaddis took a collection of unrelated maritime accidents, some occurring hundreds of miles apart, some occurring in completely different decades, and crammed them into his newly drawn geometric boundary. He used evocative, eerie language. He spoke of mysterious disappearances and unexplained phenomena. The public, fueled by Cold War anxieties and a growing fascination with UFOs, devoured it. But the true apex of the lie arrived in 1974. Part 2, the best-selling illusion. If Vincent Gaddis built the frame of the Bermuda Triangle, a man named Charles Berlitz built the monument. Berlitz was a linguist, an heir to the Berlitz language school fortune, and a passionate believer in the paranormal. He wrote a book simply titled The Bermuda Triangle. It became an international phenomenon. It sold over 20 million copies. It was translated into 30 languages. It shaped the cultural consciousness for a generation. If you ask anyone today why they think the Bermuda Triangle is real, their reasons can almost certainly be traced back to the pages of Berlitz's book. Berlitz took the concept of the triangle and elevated it to a supernatural meat grinder. He didn't just suggest that ships went missing, he claimed they vanished in broad daylight under calm skies. He suggested that rescue crews found ships completely abandoned, with warm coffee still sitting on the tables and half-eaten meals left untouched, as if the crew had been instantly vaporized by an unseen force. He hinted at underwater alien bases, remnants of the lost city of Atlantis weaponizing ancient energy crystals, and localized time warps. The narrative was intoxicating. It transformed a terrifying, chaotic ocean into something orderly, something intentional. It gave the tragedy a face, even if that face was a monster. But Berlitz's greatest trick wasn't his imagination, it was his omission. He presented his book as a work of rigorous non-fiction. He cited dates, names, and official reports. To the average reader sitting at home in 1974, it looked airtight. There was only one problem. Charles Berlitz was either a spectacularly incompetent researcher or a brilliant con artist. Part 3. The Anatomy of a Lie. In 1975, a research librarian at Arizona State University named Lawrence David Kusche decided to actually do the work that Berlitz claimed to have done. Kusche was a pilot himself, and he found the claims of planes vanishing in perfect weather suspicious. He began a massive, tedious investigation. He contacted the U.S. Coast Guard, Lloyd's of London, the U.S. Navy, and various historical archives. He pulled the original weather reports, the original accident investigations, and the original newspaper clippings for every single disappearance Charles Berlitz claimed had happened. What Kusche found didn't just debunk the Bermuda Triangle, it exposed a systematic campaign of fabrication. Let us examine the anatomy of these mysterious disappearances by looking at what Berlitz wrote versus what actually happened. Consider the case of the Freya, a large German sailing vessel. According to Berlitz, the ship left Cuba in 1902 and was found a few days later in the Bermuda Triangle, completely abandoned, its sails set, its crew gone without a trace, under a clear, cloudless sky. It is the quintessential ghost ship story. When Kusche pulled the maritime records for the Freya, he found the truth. The Freya hadn't left Cuba, it had left manually from a port in the Pacific Ocean, on the opposite side of the American continent. It didn't disappear in the Bermuda Triangle, it was damaged by a massive, well-documented Pacific hurricane off the coast of Mexico. The crew didn't vanish into a time warp, they were rescued by another ship. Berlitz had moved a ship across an entire continent, ignored a hurricane, and invented a mystery out of thin air. Then there is the SS Marine Sulphur Queen, a massive T-2 tanker carrying a cargo of molten sulfur, which vanished in 1963. Berlitz wrote that the ship sailed into calm seas inside the triangle and simply ceased to exist, suggesting a sudden, supernatural abduction. The official Coast Guard investigation painted a radically different picture. The Marine Sulphur Queen was a floating disaster. It was a converted World War II vessel that had suffered multiple internal fires before its final voyage. The cargo of molten sulfur was prone to leaking, gas buildups, and explosions. The ship was notorious for being structurally weak, and it sailed directly into a violent gale with waves reaching 16 feet. The Coast Guard concluded that the ship likely suffered a catastrophic structural failure or an internal explosion, breaking apart and sinking instantly in a raging storm. There was no mystery. There was only a poorly maintained ship pushed beyond its limits by a brutal ocean. This was the pattern Kusche found over and over again. If a ship sank in a furious hurricane, Berlitz wrote that the weather was calm. If a ship sank hundreds of miles away in the middle of the Atlantic or the Gulf of Mexico, Berlitz dragged it into the boundaries of the triangle. If a ship was reported missing but actually returned to port a few days later, Berlitz recorded the disappearance but conveniently forgot to record its return. In some cases, Kusche discovered that the ships Berlitz claimed had vanished never even existed. They were completely fictional names fabricated by pulp magazine writers to fill space. Part 4. The Illusion of Proportion. When Lawrence Kusche published his findings in 1975 in a book titled The Bermuda Triangle Mystery, Solved, the intellectual foundation of the myth collapsed. He proved that the number of ships and planes going missing in this area was not statistically higher than any other heavily trafficked region of the ocean. This brings us to the psychological core of the illusion, the law of large numbers. The area designated as the Bermuda Triangle is one of the most heavily traveled shipping lanes in the world. Every single day, hundreds of massive cargo ships, cruise liners, oil tankers, and commercial aircraft cross through this exact region. It connects the eastern seaboard of the United States with Europe, the Caribbean, and South America. If you take any patch of ocean on Earth that experiences that level of traffic, combined with frequent tropical storms, unpredictable currents, and complex underwater topography, you are going to get accidents. You are going to get sinkings. To say that the Bermuda Triangle is dangerous because ships sink there is like saying a major highway intersection in New York City is haunted because it has more car accidents than a dirt road in rural Wyoming. It is an illusion of proportion. The mythmakers gave you the numerator, the number of accidents, but they intentionally hid the denominator, the total number of successful trips. When you look at the denominator, the percentage of vessels that disappear in the triangle drops to a fraction of a percent. It is, by all statistical measures, one of the safest maritime routes in the world. Lloyd's of London, the premier maritime insurance market since the 17th century, does not charge higher premiums for ships traveling through the Bermuda Triangle. They are an institution built entirely on calculating risk based on hard data, not ghost stories. If the triangle were real, they would be losing billions of dollars. They aren't. Part 5, The Silent Accusers. So, why do we still believe it? Why, in the 21st century, do documentaries still get made, articles still get written, and people still speak about the Bermuda Triangle with an air of conspiratorial reverence? Because human beings are narrative creatures. We loathe emptiness. We are terrified of the concept of nothingness. When a ship sinks in the deep ocean, it doesn't always leave a neat marker. The Atlantic Ocean is not a swimming pool, it is a violent, shifting environment. The underwater geography of the triangle features the Puerto Rico Trench, the deepest point in the entire Atlantic Ocean, plunging to depths of over 27,000 feet. If a plane or ship suffers a catastrophic failure and plunges into that abyss, it is gone. The sheer pressure and darkness ensure it will likely never be found. Furthermore, the region is dominated by the Gulf Stream, a powerful, swift ocean current that moves faster than a racing river. Any debris, oil slick, or life raft left on the surface after a crash is carried away at speeds of several knots within hours. By the time a search and rescue team arrives at the last known coordinates, the evidence has been scattered across hundreds of miles of open water. To the human mind, an empty patch of water where a ship used to be feels like an impossibility. It feels like magic. It feels like a crime. We cannot accept that a multi-ton steel vessel can simply be erased by the wind and the waves. It feels too random. Too cruel. So, we invent a monster. We invent a triangle. We invent an ancient city or an alien race. Because a malicious force targeting travelers is, paradoxically, more comforting than the reality that the ocean is vast, cold, completely indifferent to human survival, and that sometimes, we simply make mistakes. The men of Flight 19 didn't enter a portal. They were led by a disoriented commander, flew into a storm in the dark, ran out of fuel, and crashed into an unforgiving sea. The rescue plane that went after them didn't get abducted, it was a Martin Mariner, an aircraft model known by crews at the time as a flying gas tank due to its history of fuel leaks. Multiple witnesses on a nearby surface ship saw that specific plane explode in mid-air exactly when it went off the radar. There are no mysteries here. There are only tragedies wrapped in lies, sold to a public eager to believe that the world is more mysterious than it actually is. The Bermuda Triangle was never a geographic anomaly. It was a corporate product, manufactured in the pages of pulp magazines and best-selling paperbacks, designed to exploit our fear of the dark and our love for a good story. The greatest trick the triangle ever pulled wasn't making ships disappear. It was making our common sense vanish into thin air.